We are now live on YouTube with the January 21st, 2019 meeting of the Joint Foundation Bootstrap Committee. We have 8 different people who have managed to make it today. Thank you everyone for showing up. And we have a pretty full agenda, so we'll jump right into it. The first section that we have is a discussion about project progression. We have 3 proposals going for various stages right now. So let me just open the pull requests to cross-reference. We have 1 stage 1 proposal and 2 stage 0 proposals. The stage 1 proposal is my proposal for community board representation to stage 1. As an update, this is the proposal that suggests having, of the 3 seats, 1 for the CPC, 1 as a floating seat for the CPC to assign on an annual basis, and 1 for the individual membership program that would activate once there's 2,000 members. There's also an activation for the other 2 seats based on how many platinum board members there are, but based on the current membership of the foundation, both of those are already met. I recognize as of the last meeting, I think the missing thing for us to figure out was whether or not we were going to move forward with an individual membership program. And that was a separate proposal that needed to be dug into. But I do think that at least for stage 1, that we have everything in here, and I'd like to see this landed and then iterated on. There is essentially an alternative community board proposal within Michael Dawson's proposal for the CPC charter. So I think that for now would be essentially an alternative proposal, and perhaps that should be documented. But does anyone object to landing this proposal as stage 1?
No, I'd be fine if you put the reference in the README saying that this is one of the possibilities and the other one's over here.
I agree. It would be great if there was just a easier to discover reference to just look at the two differences, but no objections to the staging.
Okay, great. So I'll go through, and then in the section about what's blocking for stage 2, I'll make a note about that with a direct reference to where in the text in the other proposal you can find the alternative. I think as it is right now, there isn't any other proposals on the plate, so it's kind of between those 2 proposals, dependent on where we end up with the individual membership proposal. Excellent. So the next 2 that we have are 2 proposals from Dan Ehrenberg. One is the shared interfaces documentation effort. The other one is the standards outreach meeting effort. Both of these are proposals for programs that would be in collaboration with TC39. Dan came on in a previous meeting. I guess this may have been 2 weeks ago or so. And everyone seemed excited about the 2 proposals. They're only going for stage 0. So it's not even necessarily has what's necessary to move this forward, but just kind of ideas that we want to explore. I think that there's enough in both of these proposals to land as stage 0. Does anyone object to landing either of these proposals, assuming that they have sign off on GitHub?
I have no objection. I am curious, though, if this is something that we need to get to the definition of the foundation and the bylaws and so on, or if this is all work that can be done post or even parallel with the same group or a larger group going into the merger, or after the merger actually is set with bylaws. Because I think if we aren't careful, we can scope creep this group to the point that we're defining everything, and I don't think that's appropriate.
So I think that's a good question. The intent on this, I think, was that we're going to continue this proposal process
Got it.
for all programs moving forward. So this was an example of someone bringing together something, and my assumption would be that this proposal process would be something that would begin to be owned by the CPC after the merger works.
That makes perfect sense for me then, in which case I have no problem getting this landed. I just want to make sure that we discuss things in terms of, or this group discuss things in terms of getting to bylaws. Yep.
I also think for what it's worth, it's fair for us to maybe hold off on landing non-bylaw related stuff, but I had already landed a stage 0 proposal around like regular town halls. So perhaps what we could do is just make it a thing right now that things that are non-bylaw related just land without a lot of work as stage 0 as kind of future ideas for us to explore.
Yep.
I'd be a fan of that. That also helps us kind of think about some potential sessions to run at the Collaborator Summit that are part of bootstrapping, the new programs and stuff. So,
which is awesome. And I love collecting the ideas and getting places for people to insert and participate, insert their excitement and participate as this gets off the ground. But I want to get it off the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's land these as stage 0 and make it a precedent that, like, for now, we'll keep proposals that are not explicit to the bylaws and bootstrapping of the foundation in there. And then, we never know where it will land. So at least this way we're empowering people and supporting them.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Cool. So that is that for those two proposals. We'll land them both. I'll take the action item of getting to those. We have now 3 main agenda items to get into for the remainder of our meeting. We have drafting initial governance for the Merge Foundation, define open governance requirements for top-level projects, and clarify intentions around project codes of conduct. It's dawning on me that the drafting initial governance for the Merge Foundation is likely one that we should have the most time for. So do you think it maybe makes sense for us to do the other 2 first in case they wrap early and then just spend the remaining time on the drafting initial governance? Or should we keep with the order that we have right now?
That makes sense to me. I don't think these other 2 will really take too much time.
Okay.
That sounds good.
So then let's start with this one, define open governance requirements for top-level projects. This is issue number 74. It cross-references the project progression proposal from Jory. And I think part of this maybe could be balanced between Mateo and Jory, but I believe this was about open governance being a requirement to being a top-level project and trying to find some sort of definition for what that meant. Is that an accurate description?
Yes. So this topic came about because we were looking at the staging of projects, and one idea that came up was, should open governance be a requirement of top-level projects? And, if so, what does that mean, essentially? And we had a really productive meeting now last week before our last meeting, I believe, and got some conversation going on this issue, number 74. I believe it was Mateo's actually suggestion to potentially look at the mentorship program that the JSF has and the TAC as maybe a basis for starting. And we've already come up with a couple of probable changes to that, just based on the feedback on the thread. Importantly, rather than no more than 1/3 of the project, I think, let me see, let me make sure I'm saying this correctly. There's a line in there that says no more than 1/3 of any project is affiliated with the same employer. That is probably not easy to measure, and probably not really what we intend. I think the focus we want to kind of highlight here is the diversity of the governing body of the project. And so the suggestion is that no more than 1/3 of the governing body be affiliated with the same employer. But that seems to be the biggest, of material to chew on, unless there's something else somebody would like to bring up. I see Mike Dolan actually has his hand up.
Hey, Jory, I was just curious, and maybe this is in the other proposal, but would there be a charter for each project? When we've done foundations that host multiple projects before, we usually do a charter per project, where we have a template that we start from that basically encapsulates these types of points. And then that way, all of the projects have this embedded in the actual charter for each project. And so I wasn't sure if that's the intention. We might be able to use some of the templates that we already have as a baseline for this too.
Yeah, so the idea is that we would borrow from the intake questions, basically that this CNCF has, to capture some of this stuff initially, and then I think the CNCF does this where they kind of go back and forth with the project to make changes if they need to be made, and then that they kind of collaborate on, I guess, a charter type document, and then that becomes the application, and that's how the project is accepted, is my understanding. I may be wrong. I'm not in the CNCF.
All right. What I might do is I'll email you offline with a template that we use, and then see if maybe that somehow merges into this at some point. So
okay, yeah.
If it's helpful, I could also request that some of the CNCF TOC participate in one of these calls to talk through their process and what they've been doing.
I think that would be helpful, for sure, if others do.
Okay, let me see if I can get someone to help with us. They're about to rotate who's on that technical oversight committee. So we may get someone who is saying, well, we used to, but we'll see. The way the bylaws got written for that, we rotate 8 of the 9 members this year, which is an error. Don't do that.
On this front, the one question I have is where, it sounds like we have a pretty good set of text to start with. Where would this fit into the proposals that we have, or is it a new one?
So I think that so right now project progression is stage 1, and one of the blocking issues is that open governance thing to make it to stage 2. So I would like to be able to take what we've worked on and submit a PR for stage 2 for project progression. And the idea is that this bucket of work of sort of intaking a project, assessing what stage they should come in at, and either approving or continuing to work on the application is a task that is owned by the CPC. So I would say that it's something that kind of nests under CPC work because it's something that the CPC will own. But that's
I guess my question was more like, does it fit into the existing proposal for project progression? And so, you'll merge it into there, or do we need some other proposal that
Oh, I think we can just make it fit into that because
okay.
At least so as to not overcomplicate it, but
yep.
My gut.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I was just trying to clarify what the next step is, kind of.
Good question.
I mean, it sounds like the next step is an update or a PR that updates that project progression would incorporate this and whatever else needs to go in, right?
Yeah.
I absolutely agree.
So is that something, Jory, you were planning to do or need help or?
I can totally tackle that. Of course, I always love everybody's comments and input on what we're doing. So on my PR, so I assume it's a team effort anyway.
Yep. Sure.
Okay, so just typing up the last couple of notes while I've been chatting. Other questions on this one? Or points, Matteo, too? You certainly had a lot of feedback on the open governance conversation as well.
Sorry, can you repeat it, Jody? I'm a little bit, here is a little bit noisy, sorry.
Oh, I was just asking if you think I've missed anything on this particular discussion.
No, I am, it's actually, you were very throughout, so perfect. Thank you for recapping this very well.
Awesome, thanks. So I think I can dive into, if we're good with this one, I'm happy to just dive into the other piece that was related to our discussion on the codes of conduct. Does that make sense now?
Yeah, please go for it.
Okay, cool. So as a part of that conversation, we also identified a gap around the intentions behind the codes of conduct. And this came up because we ask in our application process for projects to provide a link to their current code of conduct. And we came up with a few high level but very important questions. One, do we allow projects to bring in their own codes of conduct or require acceptance of the foundation code of conduct? Two, where in the foundation do we potentially have a COC or enforcement support team chartered? And three, what is the expectation for that group of people in terms of enforcing the COC? Do they proactively monitor all of the repos, or is their mandate more to be there in case of emergency, so to speak, to be reactive? And so that is what prompted this issue. And we've had a pretty good bit of exchange on it in a short period of time. It seems like the group is leaning towards requiring the projects to come in to adopt basically the foundation minimum COC, and if they would like to make it more stringent, because that's what fits their community, that's possible for them to do. But we want to make sure that there's a baseline from which everybody operates. There's also seems to be some consensus that a group of people kind of mandated with the task of helping to enforce the COC is there to support, excuse me, to support the project maintainers with issues, but not to say be the COC for that project, the COC committee for that project writ large. So they play more of a support role versus a policing role, which is not really the word I want to use, but is the word I just used. And I think the other open question that we're not really clear on is where that team ends up getting chartered. It seems like it's something that will end up being chartered out of the COC or CPC, sorry, but I don't think that that's entirely settled. Michael Dawson and Manil and Matteo have also been active on this, so wonder if you guys have anything else you'd want to add to that particular thread.
I guess the one thing, I don't know if it was in the thread, but I think it could be an escalation, like it's a support and escalation potentially would be the role in my mind versus the day-to-day moderation. The other thing I'd wonder is like from the node project, one of the challenges we had is like what happens if it's the complaints are against people who are in the CPC, for example, right?
Mhm.
So I almost wonder if it should somehow be chartered not directly under the CPC, maybe with some CPC representation. And, because it should act as the escalation process if somebody's unhappy with what the CPC is doing, I would guess. I don't know.
Dan Applequist has their hand up.
Oh, well, I didn't have a comment on that last bit. Although I do agree that it should not be beholden to the CPC because of those issues. But I wanted to ask about what's best for the groups that are important stakeholders of a community, of a code of conduct, right? Like, is it best? What is that what's driven the discussion about whether or not what powers or what responsibility the centralized code of conduct committee or whatever you're calling it should have versus and also is for existing projects that already have a strong code of conduct, is there any grandfathering suggested for those projects, or is there kind of like a period of time where projects will be able to transition to the new code or to the approved code of conduct?
Do we have, like, are some of the top level projects within the JS Foundation not have a code of conduct, or one that we think is, I guess we don't know what our new one might be, but
we don't know what our new one might be, but just for info, JSF has a code of conduct, and all of the top level projects have chosen to adopt that code of conduct. It is, I think it's sort of the predecessor to the TC39's code of conduct. So it's been around for a little while. So
right, but we're looking at the contributor covenant, right? As this, or am I out of date?
The contributor covenant is what the Node project uses. Yeah. I think that there still was, we did not have consensus around bring your own code of conduct, especially one that fell in line. Like, I know the JSF code of conduct, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? Like, it's a good code of conduct. And you could say the same thing about like the Mozilla code of conduct or a number of other code of conducts that exist.
Right. Which is basically just the reason I'm asking the question about grandfathering, right? Because we're going to have a bunch of projects that are already under a code of conduct that we all pretty much view as fine. And, but will they either be able to say, no, okay, well, we're just going to keep our code of conduct, or will they be able to say, okay, here's our plan for transitioning to the new code of conduct?
I could see this being similar to like what we were thinking about regarding like CLAs and DCO, which we also haven't dug into that much yet. But I think that if a project has a process that works, the process is successful and falls within the spirit of what we're trying to do as a foundation, I don't see any need to do churn just for the sake of churn. So, if there's a good code of conduct and it's in place, I would imagine it's as simple as the CPC saying, this is a good enforceable and enforced code of conduct. And if anything, like, to me, I think the bigger red flag would be whether or not it has moderation guidelines and whether or not it's being enforced than like what the text itself says. And, I would fully support any project coming in with their own code of conduct that is within the spirit of what the foundation's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, so maybe we just need to list, is it that you list one or more, or it's like, that they can be approved each time they come in? It'd probably be good to, like, if we have a list of ones we think are okay, either add them to that list as their, new projects come in with them or something, just to make it easy for future times.
I mean, that sounds similar to what we probably should be doing for licenses, to be honest. Right. Or committer process. Like, these all just seem like things that maybe an ongoing whitelist.
Yeah.
may not be a bad process for that. Although, yeah, I guess is licenses, and this is maybe a good question for our lawyers on the call. Are licenses something we want to whitelist for? Or do we want a blacklist of licenses we absolutely will not support? Or is it kind of both?
Hold on. Coming back to codes of conduct for a second. 2 points. One being, actually, there is a advantage to having one single code of conduct, which is if we have this unified enforcement / not enforcement, but escalation and support function, then it makes their jobs easier if there's one code of conduct that they can be familiar with and understand the procedures of and understand the enforcement mechanisms of. And sorry, the second point I just wanted to make is who's reaching out to marginalized groups and communities within our shared community here to make sure that this helps to support their needs. So it's rather than just having a tick box saying, yes, code of conduct, we have it. Let's do a sanity check with some of the people that are actually impacted by codes of conduct and I'm certainly happy to help do that.
This is Andy Updegrove. If I can add a couple of things. Certainly from a legal and an organizational point of view, there's a lot to be said for having one code of conduct across all the projects. Whether you think that's important enough, to want to require it, is kind of up to you. But, for example, if you don't do that, who's going to decide which ones make the grade and which not? Yes, if you have a list of ones that are deemed to be acceptable, that's easy. But how about the ones that aren't on the list? Who makes the call? What's the, who makes the close call? The other thing that you might want to think about is that what are you trying to create here? At LF right now, for the last several years, there's been a lot of focus on diversity, on inclusion, on respect, on things like that. If you look at Apache, from a different perspective, there's an Apache way. Do you want your new organization to be about something, or is it just an umbrella? And code of conduct would be certainly one of those things that would fall into the category of, are we about something? I don't think that that's something that you're necessarily going to decide today, but you might want to sort of put it in mind as you continue to have these discussions is, are we about something? And if so, do we start thinking about that when we make decisions like code of conduct? Thanks.
So it sounds to me like we have some research to do.
Definitely. I mean, I think if we're going to, and I think Dan Applequist's point to me is very well taken, that our focus so far in my mind has been around, let's make sure that the operational, system here is in place, but we haven't really gone to these communities to see that the operational system is one that actually supports them. So it does sound like that is a very obvious thing to be doing next.
I think the other thing I wonder is, do we believe that it'll be a blocker to any projects if we ask them to take on a single code of conduct? Like if they already have one, if we said no, one of the conditions, is that likely to slow down projects, or ones that already have a good one, not, and I don't know how we'd get that data.
I think it's more than just offering them a code of conduct, right? It's also a process. So like to Dan's point, and Dan, I don't think that this is necessarily stop energy. Like if we want to have some sort of escalation process foundation-wide, or some sort of foundation-wide moderation team that can help support projects that don't have the resources to do it themselves, there is a lot of value in having that single document and a single moderation policy that's foundation-wide, especially from like a fairness perspective as well as like a consistency perspective.
That's sort of where I was coming from. And if it's not going to be something that slows down any project from joining, then I would say that's just the way to go, right? But if we find that like half the projects we'd like to join the foundation say, whoa, I'm not going to join because, you know, I got a perfectly good code of conduct and I don't want to change, that would be something that might make you change your mind, right? Otherwise, having a single one does have a lot of advantages, right?
Yeah. We're getting close to the time on this. So as action items, does it sound reasonable for us to reach out to maintainers of projects as well as to individuals from underrepresented groups and get a pulse as to, you know, if there's a preference for either approach? Because I guess the flip side of it, you know, is perhaps a project wants to have a stronger code of conduct. And do we really want to be telling them they can't do that?
That's slightly different though. Like if you said you take this one or a stronger one, I guess then you could get into the whole thing of like, well, the one we have already is stronger and it's based on something else.
Yeah, but that's just like one of the unexpected side effects of saying it is the one true document. And then anyways.
You could structure it though, like where it's like, this is the one true document, but you can add to it. You just can't take away from it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. As I said, we've used the allotted time for this, so I think we should move on to our final agenda item for now. Does anyone have any last minute things to add to this?
Can we just, can we memorialize the action items?
Well, I think Michael and I can take on the action item of talking to the node.js projects. Jory or Daniel, do one of you want to take on the action item of talking to the JSF projects?
Sure.
Yes.
And then outside of that, I'm not sure how we want to approach talking to people from underrepresented groups. I would like to suggest that perhaps we don't rush a decision on that right now and revisit this in the next meeting.
I mean, I almost wonder if we need a proposal to make it a bit more concrete.
Wow.
Yeah, I think so. I think because this is sort of happening, this is kind of happening as a tangent to another conversation. So I think this does need to be, we need a proposal.
Okay. Does someone want to take the action item of drafting that proposal?
I could start the first draft.
Okay, if you get something up, I can review it and we could try to get something into stage 1 for the next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just try and put at least the scaffolding that we can then iterate stuff into.
Great.
So I'll just pick, I think I'll pick the you know, we all adopt the contributor covenant approach and put some wording around that, and then we can see if that doesn't sound good, we can have counter proposals and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, great. So that leads us to our final bit here, which is number 33, drafting initial governance for the merged foundation. And you know, we've dug into a bunch of tangential things to this, but for the next 20 minutes, you know, I think we could dig into a couple things. What does the CPC look like? So how does representation on the CPC look like? Who gets to go to the CPC? We also have the CPC charter proposal that's open. That's Michael Dawson's proposal. We also have the proposal for the community board representation, which we landed but did not discuss at length. So I think overall here, what we should be discussing and you know, the direction it goes into is like, how is this one? Is someone trying to speak?
Mimi 1 minute.
Mateo, is that Mateo?
I think it's Hassan.
Okay.
Mimi. No.
Or maybe
appears to be Hassan.
So on 37, I think the comment in there was just we could probably close that in favor of the actual CPC charter doc. So what does the CPC look like? So
yeah, can you? I know that there's some people on the call who haven't been on all the calls. Do you want to give a quick overview of where that proposal's at right now?
sure. But just before we moved on, I just wanted to
Okay.
see if we have consensus to close 37. We might as well just do that and get it off the list. Does that make any objections to that?
None here.
Nope.
Okay. I'm just going to put in the meeting discussed in last meeting. Agree. Close. Okay. Okay, right. So in terms of a summary of the CPC charter, it covers a number of things. I'm just going to open it up so that I can find the 3 key things that sorry, the link is not working for me. I'm just going to get to the PR, or actually not to the PR, to the, I'm going to find the old PR, because I'd listed 3 main things that, no, sorry, I'm just looking for it. So I'd had the 3 main things to make sure we talk about there. Right, so the 3 things that were called out that remain to be discussed, which were the balance between the autonomy and enforcement of the CPC and related requirements on projects. So like, do we require a minimal COC or not, which we've been discussing. Non-responsibilities of the CPC, and then observers versus regular members versus voting members. I think on the last one, Miles, you were going to write a proposal, like a PR as a counter proposal, right?
Yeah, I was going to go through and write some alternatives. I haven't had an opportunity yet. I believe the biggest points right now were whether or not we wanted 1 or 2 representatives from each project. I think that was the biggest one. And then the community seats, there's already a proposal for that alternative.
Right. In my mind, the biggest one was whether there were regular members or not.
Oh yes, and the regular membership as well.
Right, like that. Whether it's 1 or 2, it's like, okay, it's a number. There's advantage, disadvantages. To me, the biggest thing was the regular members or not, and then, like you said, the number of board seats. Again, that's advantages and disadvantages. But so I don't know whether. I mean, I would suggest we wait for those counter proposals to dig into that, unless there's some specific things people want to bring up and discuss. Otherwise, we could dive into the other 2 issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I guess maybe a good way, maybe we could work backwards for this then, like to the board members and Linux reps and legal folks. What are kind of the blocking bits right now from the process that we've done in getting towards bylaws?
We have draft bylaws in place that have been reviewed. This is Andy Updegrove. Have been reviewed by legal counsel for node.js, also JS Foundation, and also LF has at least taken a look at them. You could regard those as being what the lawyers think is sort of a common sense meld of the 2 structures, but it still needs to be vetted by the board of directors of each organization from the corporate member point of view and from the 2 communities from their point of view. I think most significantly, the question is what balls are still in the air that end up need to be reflected in the bylaws. So I think what's there probably isn't too controversial, but it won't be finalized until some of the discussions that you're having on these calls get to consensus, and then some of that gets reflected in charters and some of it gets reflected in the bylaws. The board of directors seats would be, and selection process would be a good example of the bylaws side of it.
Yeah, if I might just tag on to what Andy said, we're mostly looking at, the board seats and who's filling them or who makes decisions about who fills them. And then I think also, the membership classes. And so in that, I'd put, clarity around what's going to happen with individual membership is something else we need to figure out.
But to come up with customizing the bylaws to reflect the decisions, that's something that can be done really quickly. So I think the gating factor is filling in the sorts of blanks that Mike just mentioned. After that, they can be put in a draft and a review draft by the lawyers really quickly. And then after that, it's just orchestrating review by both boards in the community to see whether it reflects what everyone, is happy with. It could be that there's some points that should be discussed, by the community with the board before they're turned into bylaws. Because, there's two sides that are giving input, and it might make sense to chunk it into bylaws, but I don't know that we've gotten any feedback from the boards yet. Mike, do you want to speak to any of that?
No, I don't think we've got any feedback yet. So at this point, it's pretty open-ended because I think the last draft, there was still, some blanks around these key areas. I don't think there was really much other than, just sort of drafting cleanup that you guys did.
So just making sure that I'm following it accurately, it's clarity on the top level representation in the individual membership program. Those are the biggest things right now. So the board representation.
Yeah, anything that deals with a board seat or a class of membership are the key things that we're trying to get into the bylaws. So the only two things that I think are up for discussion still are locking down, sort of the structure around the board seat assignments. And then in that, what are we going to do with the membership, in individual membership in particular, if we, keep that as is or change it to like an individual sponsorship or something like that. We need to know that before we finalize that draft to send it out.
If we call the individual program in the individual's program, an individual sponsorship or an individual supporter program, does that change how much effort we have to put into it ahead of time? We still have to figure out the board seat. But if we don't call it membership, does it change?
Yeah. Some things are definitely bylaw oriented. If it has to do with the board seat, then it has to be in the bylaws. On the other hand, quote unquote membership could be, something that's sort of a, classic corporate bylaws type arrangement, usually because it has some sort of voting rights, usually relating to directors. But you could have quote unquote membership that's kind of outside the bylaws, entirely, particularly within individual projects. I mean, membership in a project doesn't have to have anything to do with membership in the organization. So depending upon what you conceive membership is, it could be in the bylaws or outside the bylaws, depending upon what you have in mind. Sort of a blurred line.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then just another question I have is, so, once we reach consensus on these things or potentially things that are in parallel, what are the remaining things that need to happen to ratify those bylaws and make the merger official?
Well, for the bylaws, the main thing is a board vote, because that's on the corporate side of the house as compared to the technical side of the house. So legally, the bylaws require a board vote. However, from a merger point of view, mechanically, one of the two organizations will dissolve, and the assets, principally the trademarks, because everything else is open source, and the cash in the bank account will move over to the other organization. So after that transfer occurs, that organization will dissolve, and the dissolution will require a membership, will require a vote by members. Currently, for a variety of reasons, it seems like the most pragmatic approach would be for JS Foundation to dissolve. So that would mean that both organizations would need a board vote, and JS Foundation would need a vote of the members that are entitled to vote.
And is there anything in particular that needs to happen from the JSF projects side for that?
I don't know the JS Foundation legal counsel is on the call. I should let them answer. If not, I can give you a generic answer.
Steve is
so. Generally, what's under JS Foundation now, as I say, about the only two things that really move over are the names of the standards and any other trademarks, the cash in the accounts, to the extent that web pages are going to move over, they move over. The URL, I guess, will move over just for redirect purposes. That's all, pretty lightweight and straightforward. There's nothing too complicated about it. As far as the individual projects, I'm not familiar with the charters of the JS Foundation projects, but I don't imagine there's anything in there, but the place to look would be in the charters of the projects. Mike, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, seems right to me.
So I guess one thing that's worth bringing up, so you said that this requires a board meeting, and we have a number of board meetings that are scheduled between now and, let's say, the end of this quarter. We have one actually this Friday, which is likely a good time to give an update on where we're at and make sure that there aren't any concerns with the current process. Then we have another one on February, I think it's February 22nd. And then we have a board meeting the week of March 11th in California for the Open Source Leadership Summit, which I believe will be potentially both the JSF and Node Foundation boards having an opportunity to do a joint board meeting with people in person. With all that in mind, what do we think is a reasonable timeline to try to officiate the merge, for lack of a better way of framing it?
Well, from a legal perspective, we can do everything, approve everything in one board meeting and typically do. And what that usually is it approves the merger, it approves the transfers, and in the case of JS Foundation, it would approve all the acts that go forward to dissolution. In order to take those votes, we should have a final version of the bylaws, or very, very close to final, and at least a reasonably final draft of the transfer agreement. After that, the same votes that authorize the merger can authorize someone, the executive director of each organization or whatever, to approve any final changes. But it doesn't really make sense to have the vote until the successor bylaws and the transfer agreement are in reasonably final shape.
So it sounds like at the very least, we'd want to have at least one or two review sessions, so that March meeting would maybe be the earliest in which we could probably reasonably do this.
Keep in mind also that, we can communicate with the boards via email, have for reviews, for example. Mm-hmm. In most cases where we've done a merger like this, we've actually set up a special board meeting outside of even the normal board cycle in many cases. Okay. So there's options and flexibility there too.
I think it would be awesome if we can target having it done toward the end of the quarter as opposed to the first time the boards are seeing it. because I think it will be up to us to push the boards as well on this.
Mm-hmm. For community members who are on the call, are there thoughts on these kinds of timelines so end of this quarter being, around the end of March?
So the thing that's jumping out to me as a piece that we have got to settle before is this individual membership piece, and what we really have. I don't feel like we've spent any time discussing this as a program and how it all nets in, and I would think that we would want to maybe prioritize that in our next meeting, because that has bylaws implications more so than some other pieces.
Can we maybe get Tracy to come present the open proposal that has been drafted by the joint? There are so many committees. The joint
strategy subcommittee.
Yep.
Thank you.
Subcommittee of the
joint foundation. Joint. Yeah.
But I think there's been a lot of work put into that, so I think it's a matter of bringing everybody up to the same level.
Yep.
And then at that point, it's probably going to be like either wait a sec or yeah, no, that sounds good.
Yeah.
And I think like back to the discussion on, the timeline. I think if you wanted, in my mind, if you're targeting end of March, then pretty much at least a month before, I don't know if ideally a little bit before that, you'd want to have here's what we're looking here. I know everybody can sort of follow along, but it would be like, here's what the whole picture looks like. Here's the chart of the CPC. Here's all the bits and pieces. Here's the representation, and then spend, that month, evangelizing, making sure people have seen it, and have a chance to comment, so that by the end of March, you're basically at the point where nobody's raised any objections. You think everybody's on side. It's no surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because I don't think we can just assume that anybody's interested has come to the repo and is watching what's going on. I think we kind of need here's what we put together, and then there's going to be a round of, people reading it, commenting, whatever, to make sure we have everybody feel like they were, consulted and involved.
Now, with that being said, could we not kind of start that process now, since we almost have everything drafted aside from the individual membership program? It seems like we kind of could.
As soon as we feel we're ready, we should start doing that. I think, like, CPC charter, we still have some key things that may change that.
Mm-hmm. But that doesn't affect the bylaws, right?
Yeah, but I think it's the people's question are going to be, what does this look like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. It's because it's the the final vote is on the bylaws, but that's basically the merge or no merge, the no go, right? And it's so I think you need the complete picture so people can say, yeah, I understand what's going on. That seems reasonable to me. And I don't think the bylaws on their own are going to do that well enough.
Okay.
But I do agree, like, if we can close out things earlier, like say we finished on the project charter or the CPC charter, but we're still working on project progression, it would be a good time to start evangelizing that as hey, this is what we think it is. We're still working on this other piece, but this piece looks like it's what we're going to end up with.
So this makes me wonder if it would be smart to start collaborating on like a joint blog post across the JS and the Node foundations to kind of summarize this work and kind of how we expect things to, like the picture we want to paint, and then also the picture we want to paint for how the foundation is going to evolve with these great new suggested, proposed programs from Dan and other members of the community that we're going to, flesh things out more,
I think that's a good idea. Like, and even we could plan to do a couple, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to help with that. And with that, we are right at 10 a.m. So I think it's time to wrap this up. Thank you everyone for joining, especially on the day off. Jory, maybe we could sync this week and bring in other people as necessary to start working on the blog idea. And Boston, we can start talking about how we start socializing this and making sure that people have an opportunity to discuss.
Yeah, I'm happy to participate in the blog too. So I think we'll.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up the meeting. Thanks everyone for joining.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Talk to y'all later. Bye.
Bye.